Have you ever wondered why a man vanishes from your life, only to reappear as if drawn by an invisible thread he himself does not understand? It is a riddle older than the written word, a dance between the masculine and feminine unconscious that has played out under countless moons. He leaves, believing he has chosen freedom. That distance will quiet the restlessness gnawing at his chest. Yet soon, the same wind that carried him away turns against him, driving him back toward the very shore he abandoned. And you, the woman left in his wake, are left to question: is it love, guilt, habit, or something far deeper that pulls him back? In truth, his return is rarely about you as the living, breathing woman in front of him. It is about the echo. You have stirred within him an echo from his own shadow. Jung wrote that what a man does not face in himself, he will chase or flee in another. When you became the mirror of his unmet needs, unhealed wounds, and unacknowledged desires, you touched a place in him both magnetic and terrifying. He left not to escape you, but to escape the reflection you held up to him. A man often departs when the depth becomes unbearable. You may think he feared losing interest, but more often he feared losing himself. The modern man, raised in a world that prizes detachment as strength, has been trained to mistrust vulnerability. To him, intimacy can feel like stepping into a labyrinth without a map. He senses danger in the closeness. For closeness means exposure, and exposure means the shadow might be seen. And yet, absence only intensifies the pull. When he is away, the image of you is no longer tangled with the complexity of your living presence. In his solitude, his mind idealizes what he once had. The disputes, the discomfort, the quiet challenges. You pose to his ego fade, replaced by a romanticized memory. Distance transforms the mirror you once held into a portrait painted by his longing. This is why he can walk away in certainty and still find himself haunted by your ghost. You must understand, when he comes back, it is often because he seeks not you, but the sensation you gave him of touching his own soul. To a man unaware of his inner landscape, you are both the beacon and the danger. He may speak of missing you, but what he truly misses is the feeling of being awakened. For many men, a woman's presence is their first initiation into the deeper layers of themselves. You were the opening in the wall he did not know he had built, and when he stepped away, the wall closed in, and the air became too thin. Do not mistake his return as a sign of permanence. In the cyclical nature of the psyche, a man will return as many times as he leaves, until he confronts the roots of his unrest. If he has not yet faced the shadows that drove him away, he may be pulled again into the same flight, the same retreat from the intensity of his own reflection. Without inner work, the pattern repeats, like the tide endlessly kissing the shore, only to vanish again. For you, the question is not why he comes back, but why you would receive him. Is it because you still see the man beneath the fear, or because his return validates the wound that whispers, "You are not enough unless someone chooses you again and again"? The female unconscious, too, has its own shadow, the part that mistakes, the chase for devotion that mistakes his reappearance for fate. There is a truth, hard as stone yet liberating as fire. His return is not a rescue. It is a test of whether you will anchor yourself in your own worth, or drift back into the currents of his unresolved longing. The man who leaves and returns is in the throes of his own war, and you cannot fight it for him. You are not the cure for his restlessness, just as he is not the proof of your value. If you accept him without discerning his growth, you may only serve as the soft place he lands before he flees again. But if you stand firm, if you demand not his presence, but his wholeness, you force the choice back into his hands, to rise to the level of depth you require, or to finally walk away for good. And in that moment, you step out of the role of the mirror and into the role of the sovereign. For the empowered woman, his return is not the climax of the story. It is merely another scene, one where she holds the pen. And in that, perhaps for the first time, the ending is hers to write. When a man's footsteps circle back to your door, it is not always because the path was short. It is because the terrain within him is uncharted. He returns not as a conqueror, but as a wanderer, disoriented by the quiet ache of something unresolved. To the casual observer, his reappearance may seem like the restoration of fate's order. But the undercurrent tells another story, the male psyche drawn again to the source of its own disruption. The truth is, absence can make him feel powerful. But power without connection quickly curdles into emptiness. A man who leaves often believes that in solitude he will reclaim his clarity, his sense of control. Yet, control is an illusion, easily dismantled by memory. It is not you as you are now that haunts him. It is the projection he cast upon you when he first felt the stirrings of his own depths. That first glimpse of himself in your eyes was both intoxicating and intolerable. Without you there, he tries to live without the mirror. But the self that was awakened cannot be put back to sleep. The Stoics would say that man is never disturbed by events themselves, but by the judgments he makes about them. In his absence, he judges you differently than he did in the heat of closeness. He forgets the friction that exposed his own contradictions and instead remembers the sweetness that fed his longing. This is why time apart can transmute even the most turbulent connection into something he perceives as worth reclaiming. Yet, the shadow remains untouched, like a serpent coiled beneath the surface, ready to strike at the first signs of real intimacy. He may tell himself he comes back out of love, but more often it is the unfinished thread that pulls him. The masculine unconscious resists incompletion. The psyche craves resolution even when it does not know how to create it. And so, he finds himself drawn back to the place where the story began to unravel, hoping perhaps that by stepping into the same room, the narrative might weave itself whole again. But here lies the paradox. If nothing within him has shifted, the same forces that drove him away will be waiting to greet him upon his return. You may think of it as a tidal rhythm. He flows toward you in hunger, retreats in fear, then returns again when the hunger outweighs the fear. This is not yet love. It is compulsion, a looping orbit around a center he has not dared to claim. And what of you? Each time he returns, your shadow is summoned as well. The part of you that yearns to be chosen, the part that craves the vindication of his renewed pursuit, awakens like an old wound touched by familiar hands. You may feel a flicker of triumph, but underneath it lives a quiet bargain to accept him as he is, rather than as the man he could become. Jung would call this the trap of unconscious identification. You become entangled in his unfinished work as though it were your own. This is where discernment becomes your weapon. You must look at his return not with the soft eyes of nostalgia, but with the sharp gaze of the sovereign. Is he here as the man who left, simply circling the same unresolved path? Or has he crossed the threshold of his own shadow? Has he faced the discomfort that made him bolt? Or is he seeking the relief of your presence without the burden of growth? The empowered feminine does not fear his absence, for she understands that the space he leaves is not emptiness, it is room for clarity. In this space, she sees the truth, that a man's return is not proof of destiny, but a moment of choice. The one who has done his inner work will not come back merely to feel better. He will come back to build, to stand in the fire of connection without retreating. And the one who has not will bring only the echo of old patterns, dressed in the language of longing. This is why you must guard the gates of your heart. Do not confuse his motion for his transformation. Let his return be met not with immediate surrender, but with quiet inquiry. Let him show through his actions, over time, without the scaffolding of your reassurance, whether he has earned his place again. For the woman who knows her depth, a man's reappearance is not a gift to be unwrapped but a test to be measured. And if he falters, she does not close the door in rage. She simply allows the tide to recede once more, knowing that her worth is not diminished by his absence, nor inflated by his return. There is a strange alchemy in his absence, a transmutation, that happens not in his body but in the corridors of his mind. Away from you, he begins to rewrite the past, stripping away the raw edges of reality and replacing them with polished illusions. He remembers your laugh, but not the way it unsettled him when it came at moments he could not control. He recalls the warmth of your presence, yet forgets the cold dread he felt when you asked a question that pierced too close to the truth. The mind edits what the heart cannot yet process, and so he convinces himself that leaving was a misstep, that returning is a restoration of what was meant to be. But this is not the voice of fate. It is the echo of his unconscious pulling at the same thread. In Jungian terms, what he seeks is not the woman herself, but the anima she embodies for him. You have become the symbolic keeper of his lost vitality, the living image of his unlived life. You carry in your essence the qualities he has yet to integrate: depth, intuition, emotional courage. When he stands in your presence, these qualities awaken within him like dormant seeds feeling the first touch of rain. And yet, without the courage to tend them himself, he leaves only to return when the thirst for that awakening becomes unbearable. One can be both genuine in his longing and incapable of sustaining it. This is a truth to many women learn the hard way. He may come back with tenderness in his eyes and sincerity in his voice, but sincerity without transformation is simply repetition. If he has not yet confronted the shadow, the hidden fears, the pride, the unspoken grief, then his return is not the dawn of a new chapter, but the replay of an old one. The Stoics warned against confusing desire with destiny. Epictetus taught that you cannot control the will of another, only your own response to it. His coming back may stir old feelings in you, but feelings are not facts, and nostalgia is not evidence of change. You must weigh the present man against the patterns of the past, for patterns rarely dissolve without deliberate effort. If you find yourself softening simply because he returned, pause. Ask, what does his return cost me? Does it ask me to abandon the boundaries I forged in his absence? Does it tempt me to silence my own needs in exchange for the fleeting comfort of his presence? The shadow of the feminine is the part that would rather be chosen by the wrong man than stand alone in her sovereignty. This shadow thrives on the illusion that love is proven by the one who keeps coming back, even if he never truly stays. Understand that there is a difference between a man who returns to you and a man who returns for you. The former seeks relief from his own discomfort. The latter seeks connection that transcends it. The former is drawn by the gravitational pull of habit and unresolved longing. The latter by the conscious choice to build something enduring. And you, standing at the threshold, must decide which stands before you now. When you see him again, watch for the signs of integration. Has he learned to sit in discomfort without fleeing? Does he take responsibility without deflecting? Is he willing to stand in the light of your truth without flinching? These are the marks of a man who has faced his shadow and emerged with the capacity to love in more than fleeting bursts. If he has not, then his return is only another revolution of the same wheel, and you, by opening the door, step back onto a ride that spins you both nowhere. The empowered woman does not fear saying no to what does not serve her, for she knows that what she refuses shapes her life as much as what she accepts. Remember, not every man who comes back is meant to stay, and not every return is meant to be received. Sometimes his reappearance is not a promise, but a mirror, showing you how far you have traveled from the woman who once waited for his knock. And in that reflection, you may see the truth. The real power was never in his leaving or his returning. It was in your ability to choose whether the door opens at all. There is a certain inevitability in the pull between two people who have touched each other's depths. Even when the connection was jagged, even when it ended with words sharp enough to cut, there remains an invisible thread, not always of love, but of unfinished inner work. His return is rarely the clean gesture it appears to be. Beneath it, there is a storm of contradictions, longing tangled with fear, tenderness laced with ego, and the ache of familiarity resisting the call of change. A man can leave for many reasons: pride, overwhelm, the seductive promise of freedom. But when he comes back, it is often because the world outside did not deliver what he imagined. The distractions lost their flavor. The solitude stopped feeling like sovereignty and began to feel like exile. He returns because, in your presence, he was forced to encounter parts of himself he cannot reach alone. And while those encounters were often uncomfortable, they made him feel more alive than the numbness that followed his departure. In Jung's view, the psyche seeks wholeness, even through chaos. If a man's conscious self is not ready to grow, the unconscious will still drag him toward the conditions that demand it, and often that means toward you. You, in his narrative, are both sanctuary and battlefield. You evoke his anima, the feminine aspect of his soul, and with it, all the unclaimed emotional territory he has avoided. It is not you alone he seeks. It is the part of himself that only awakens in your company. Yet here lies the danger. Awakening is not the same as integration. A man can be stirred, even transformed in moments, and still fall back into the reflexes of his unhealed self. He may tell you he misses you, but missing you is not the same as being ready for you. Desire alone cannot dismantle the patterns that made him leave. Without conscious work, those patterns will remain like deep ruts in the road, pulling the carriage of his intentions back into the same old direction. For the woman standing at the threshold, his return can feel like a vindication. Your mind may whisper, "See, I was worth coming back for." This is the feminine shadow's subtle trick, equating being chosen with being valued. But in truth, your value was never dependent on his absence or his presence. To believe otherwise is to hand him the authority over your own worth, an authority he never truly held. The Stoics would remind you, do not confuse external events with your internal state. His knock on your door is not a command for your heart to open. It is merely an event, and you decide what meaning, if any, it carries. This is where your own individuation demands clarity. Does his return align with the woman you have become in his absence, or does it tempt you back into the version of yourself you have outgrown? Some men return not because they have changed, but because they sense you have. They feel the shift in your energy, the way you no longer orbit their approval. the way your gaze no longer pleads but assesses. This change can magnetize them more than any affection ever did. For in the male unconscious, the woman who no longer needs them can become the ultimate conquest. But be cautious, conquest is not commitment. His pursuit may burn brightly in the moment, but without inner transformation, the flame is destined to fade, and so you must look beyond the poetry of his return. You must see whether he comes to add to your life or simply to drink from it. You must notice whether he stands on his own feet or leans on you to steady himself. You must be willing, if necessary, to close the door, not from bitterness, but from reverence for your own soul's path. The most powerful position a woman can hold is not waiting to see if he will stay, but knowing she will be whole either way. In that certainty, his presence becomes optional, his absence bearable, and his return a choice rather than a lifeline. You become the still point in the storm, the place where his cycles end, not because he is ready, but because you are. Sometimes his return is not a march, but a drift, a slow, almost reluctant pull back toward the gravity of what he once knew. You may see it in the way he reaches out without urgency, as if testing the air to see if the warmth is still there. To him, your presence is a familiar terrain, and even if he once fled from its depth, the unknown outside feels colder. In the unconscious mind, familiarity often masquerades as safety, even when the history is turbulent. He may come back speaking of change, but words are easy currency for the man who has yet to face himself. In Jungian terms, this is the persona, the mask he wears not only for you, but for himself. He wants to believe he is different, that the version of himself who walked away has been replaced by a man who understands his own depths. But the shadow is patient. It waits behind every unexamined choice, every avoided truth, without confrontation. The same fears that drove him out will steer him again. In the masculine psyche, leaving can be an act of self-preservation. Returning, however, is often an act of self-soothing. The man who has not yet integrated his inner feminine, his capacity for emotional honesty, empathy, and vulnerability, will feel pulled back toward the woman who awakened it, not because he is ready to meet her there, but because he craves the reflection of himself he once saw in her. In his absence, that reflection fades. Alone, he begins to feel less whole, and so he seeks the mirror again. But there is a cost to being someone's mirror when they are not prepared to truly see. You can become the stage on which his inner battles play out, your heart the arena, for conflicts that have nothing to do with you. This is why many women find themselves reliving the same dynamics after a man's return, because the battle is not between you and him, but between him and himself. And until he faces that opponent, the pattern will repeat like a ritual. The Stoics warned of the danger in mistaking what is outside of us for what is within. Seneca wrote, "He who does not know what the universe is, does not know where he is." In love, this means that a man who does not understand his own inner universe will forever be lost in yours. Unable to navigate without losing his way, his return may feel like fate's hand guiding him home, but often it is only the compass of his longing spinning without direction. This is where your own discipline must rise. The empowered feminine does not confuse longing with loyalty. She does not assume that a man's presence is proof of his readiness. She reads not his declarations, but his patterns. She knows that the truest form of love is built not in the swell of reunion, but in the quiet discipline of staying through discomfort, through the humbling work of self-awareness, through the daily choice to remain. When he comes back, do not simply ask. Why ask how? How has he met himself in your absence? How has he dismantled the armor that kept him from being fully known? How does he now stand in the truth of what he wants without collapsing into fear when it is given to him? These questions are not to be asked aloud, but to be held in the silence of your observation. For the man who has truly changed will answer them without needing to speak. And if the answers do not appear, if his return feels like the same step in an old dance, then your strength will be in stepping out of rhythm. You are not the same woman he left. You have walked through your own shadows in his absence. You have learned that solitude is not a void but a sanctuary, and that your value is not magnified by his gaze. It is this knowing, the unshakable awareness of your worth, that transforms his return from a lifeline into a choice. You may welcome him if he comes as a man reborn, or you may let him go if he comes only as the echo of the past. Either way, you remain whole. There is a moment, often unspoken, when the woman realizes that his return is not the climax of the story, it is a mirror not only of him, but of herself, of who she was when he left, and who she has become since. This is where the deeper archetypal truth reveals itself. Every return is a test of evolution. Has he risen into the man capable of meeting her fully, or has she risen into the woman who no longer needs him to? In the unconscious, patterns repeat until they are broken by awareness. If his leaving once cracked your sense of worth, the shadow within you will still stir when you see him again. That shadow will whisper of the comfort of his presence, the sweetness of his attention. But the empowered feminine has learned to listen beyond the whisper, to the grounded voice that says, your worth was never on the auction block of his choices. In Jungian language, his return can be the psyche's invitation for individuation for both of you. For him, it is the chance to integrate the anima, to face the emotional depths he once fled. For you, it is the opportunity to integrate the animus, the inner masculine strength that holds boundaries, chooses consciously, and protects your sacred inner life. Without this integration, you risk falling into the same polarity that once unraveled you. Him as the restless wanderer, you as the anchor hoping to hold him in place. But the truth is, no one can anchor a man who has not anchored himself. If he has not faced his fear of depth, his avoidance of vulnerability, his dependence on your presence to feel alive, then his return is not a gift, it is an intrusion. And the woman who has walked her own path of self-discovery will feel this difference instantly. She will sense whether he comes with the steady weight of commitment, or the restless urgency of someone looking to quiet his own noise. The Stoics would remind you that the measure of a person is in their actions, not their intentions. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." This truth cuts through the romance of reunion. His presence means nothing if it is not sustained by the discipline of showing up, of standing in the same place when the storms rise. Without that, his return is only motion without meaning. For the feminine, the test is subtle but profound. Can you stand in the fullness of your self-worth and let his return be just another event, not a defining moment? Can you see his longing without being consumed by it? Can you honor his humanity without surrendering your sovereignty? These are the quiet questions that separate the woman who waits from the woman who chooses. You will know you have crossed the threshold of your own individuation when his return does not pull you into the undertow of old feelings, but instead invites you to observe with calm clarity. You will see his patterns, your patterns, and the vast space between them. You will feel the pull, the the nostalgia, the desire, but it will no longer dictate your response. If he has transformed, if he now meets you with consistency, humility, and a readiness to co-create something real, you may open the door and step forward together. But if his return is only a continuation of the cycle, you will not hesitate to let it end. This is not cruelty, it is alignment. It is the knowing that your life is not a revolving door for someone else's avoidance. And so, in this moment of choice, you understand the deepest truth of all. You are not the destination he seeks. You are the mirror in which he confronts. His own becoming, whether he stays or goes again, is his path to walk. Whether you welcome or refuse is yours. And in that clarity, the balance of power shifts not in your favor or against his, but into the hands of truth itself, the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.